The river roared under the storm's fury as the rich man's shadow loomed over the wooden bridge. Without hesitation, he dropped the twin babies into the raging water below. But as the tiny bundles vanished into the darkness, a brown horse, watching from the trees, suddenly bolted forward, his hooves pounding against the mud. No one knew why he leaped into the river that night, but what he did next would change everything. The rain hadn't stopped for days. The village whispered about the rich man's madness, how his wife died in childbirth, how he blamed the twin girls for her death. That night he carried them to the bridge, his face blank as stone. The current swallowed the babies in seconds. But Storm, the old farm horse tied near the woods, snapped his rope and charged. No one had ever seen him run like that, like he knew, like he chose. He crashed into the water, his muscles fighting the waves. The villagers screamed from the bank, but Storm didn't turn back. His muzzle dipped under once, twice. Then he surged forward, a tiny bundle clutched in his teeth. One girl, alive. But where was the other? Storm's head whipped around, ears flat. The river was too fast, too dark. And then a faint cry echoed from downstream. The wind howled through the trees as Storm stumbled onto the riverbank, his legs shaking from exhaustion. The tiny girl in his mouth whimpered softly, her cries barely audible over the storm. The villagers rushed forward, their lanterns casting flickering shadows across the muddy ground. A woman wrapped the baby in her shawl, her hands trembling as she checked for injuries. "She's alive," she gasped. "But where's the other one?" Storm snorted, his nostrils flaring as he turned his head back toward the raging river. His ears twitched. He had heard something, a sound no human could detect over the thunder. Without warning, Storm lunged back into the water, his powerful legs cutting through the current. The villagers shouted after him, but he ignored them, his focus locked onto something downstream. The river twisted around jagged rocks, dragging debris and broken branches with it. Then, just as the water curved behind a cluster of boulders, Storm saw it, a scrap of fabric snagged on a low-hanging tree root. The second baby. But something was wrong. The child wasn't moving. Storm fought against the current, his muscles burning as he reached the tree. The baby girl was half submerged, her tiny body limp. With a desperate grunt, Storm clamped his teeth gently around the child's blanket and pulled her free. The villagers, who had followed along the bank, gasped as they saw him emerge with the second twin. A man waded into the shallows and took the baby from Storm's mouth, pressing his ear to her chest. Silence. Then, a weak cough. Water spilled from the infant's lips as she drew a shuddering breath. A cry of relief rose from the crowd, but Storm didn't celebrate. His ears flicked backward, hooves pounded in the distance. The rich man was coming. Had he seen what happened? Did he know his daughters were alive? The villagers exchanged panicked glances. If the rich man found out, he would finish what he started. An old farmer, his face lined with years of hardship, stepped forward. "Take the girls to the old mill," he ordered two women. "Hide them, and someone get that horse out of sight. If the master sees him, he'll know." Storm's sides heaved as he stood there, his dark eyes watching the path where the rich man would appear. He had saved the twins, but the danger wasn't over. The rich man had power, money, and a heart full of hate. If he discovered the truth, he wouldn't just come for the babies, he'd come for the horse who defied him. And Storm knew it. The old mill stood silent in the moonlight, its creaking wooden beams groaning under the weight of years. Inside, the two women huddled over the twins, wrapping them in dry blankets stolen from the rich man's own laundry lines. The babies were alive, but weak, their tiny fingers curled around the fabric as if clinging to life itself. Outside, the wind carried whispers of danger. The rich man's riders had been spotted on the main road, torches flickering like angry fireflies in the distance. They were searching, Someone must have talked. Storm stood hidden in the trees, his dark coat blending with the shadows. His ears twitched at every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. He hadn't left the twins since pulling them from the river. Something in him refused to. The old farmer had tried to lead him away to safety, but Storm had stubbornly circled back, his instincts screaming that the girls were still in danger. Now, as the first shouts echoed from the village square, he knew time was running out. Inside the mill, the younger woman, a kitchen maid from the rich man's estate, peered through a crack in the wall. Her breath caught. Torchlight reflected off polished boots and the glint of a whip. The rich man himself had come, his face twisted in fury. "Tear this village apart if you have to," he roared. "Those brats drowned. So why are my servants whispering about miracles?" The maid pulled back, her hands shaking. They were coming. And when they did, the mill would be the first place they checked. A sudden thud against the side of the building made both women jump. The older one crept to the door, cracking it open just enough to see Storm's massive head pushing against the wood. His eyes were wild, insistent. He stepped back, then turned his body sideways. A clear invitation. He wants us to follow him," the maid whispered. It was madness. A horse leading them to safety? But the sound of splintering wood from the village homes left no choice. The women bundled the twins tightly and slipped out, staying low as Storm led them into the forest. His hooves made no sound on the damp earth, his path winding through thick underbrush that hid their trail. Just as they reached the tree line, a scream ripped through the night. The rich man had found the empty mill. Storm picked up his pace, his gait steady despite the uneven ground. The forest grew denser, the moonlight barely piercing the canopy above. Then, without warning, he stopped. Before them loomed the entrance to a cave, one the villagers whispered about, but none dared enter. The Forgotten Mines, a labyrinth of tunnels from a failed gold rush, where men had vanished without a trace. The older woman balked. "We'll die in there." But Storm nudged her forward with his nose, his breath warm against her arm. From deep in the tunnels came a sound that froze their blood, a low, rumbling growl, not human, not animal, something else. Storm didn't flinch. He stepped inside, his body blocking the twins from whatever lurked in the dark. The women exchanged a terrified glance. Behind them, torchlight flickered through the trees. The rich man's men were closing in. Ahead lay the unknown. The cave swallowed them whole, its darkness thicker than the river's deepest currents. The women stumbled forward, their feet slipping on damp stone as Storm led them deeper into the tunnel. The growl they'd heard moments before had faded, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the distant drip of water. The maid clutched the weaker twin to her chest, the baby's breaths shallow and uneven. "She's not getting enough air," she whispered, panic threading her voice. The older woman, a midwife before the rich man's cruelty, left her with nothing, pressed a calloused hand to the infant's chest. Her heart still beating, but barely. "We need warmth, light." A sudden scrape of hoof against stone made them freeze. Storm had stopped ahead, his body rigid. Then, slowly, he exhaled, a long, steady breath that echoed strangely against the walls. As if answering him, a faint glow pulsed from further down the tunnel. Not torchlight, something softer, bluer. The women hesitated, but the sound of shouting from the cave's entrance forced their decision. They moved toward the light. The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast its ceiling vanished into shadow. And there, in its center, stood a sight that stole their breath. A massive oak tree, its roots bursting through the stone floor as if the earth itself had birthed it. Its leaves shimmered with that same blue light, illuminating the skeletons of long-dead miners propped against its trunk. But what held their gaze were the creatures curled among the roots, wolves, but not quite, larger. Their fur streaked silver, their eyes reflecting the tree's glow like shattered glass. The Alpha lifted its head, baring teeth as Storm stepped forward. No one moved. Then, impossibly, the Alpha dipped its muzzle, not in warning, but recognition. Storm returned the gesture. The midwife's hands trembled. "They know him," she realized. The maid's voice shook. "That's not possible." But the proof stood before them. The wolves parted, revealing a hollow beneath the tree's roots, where a small spring bubbled, its water glowing faintly. Storm nudged the women toward it. The midwife hesitated only a second before dipping her fingers into the water. It burned, but not with heat, with something deeper, a memory. Her daughter's laugh, lost to fever years ago. Gritting her teeth, she cupped the water and let a few drops fall onto the dying twins' lips. The effect was instant. The baby gasped, her back arching as color flooded her cheeks. The maid sobbed in relief, until a howl cut through the cavern, not from the wolves, from the tunnel behind them. The rich man had found them, and he wasn't alone. Cloaked figures filed into the cavern, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their hands clutching iron chains. The maid recoiled. "The mine's old guards," the midwife breathed. "But they disappeared." "No," the maid interrupted, horror dawning. "They didn't disappear. He owns them too." Storm reared, his hooves striking air as the alpha wolf lunged past him, snarling. The rich man laughed, uncoiling his whip. "I should have known," he called, his voice bouncing off the walls. "That horse always was too clever for his own good." He raised a hand, and the cloaked men advanced. "Kill the wolves, bring me the brats, and someone put a bullet in that damned animal's skull." But as the first chain rattled, the tree's light flared blindingly bright. The ground trembled, and from the shadows behind the oak, something stirred, something with too many eyes. The cavern trembled as the ancient oak's roots twisted like waking serpents, cracking stone beneath them. The blue light pulsed violently, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move on their own. The cloaked figures hesitated, chains slackening in their grip, as the thing in the darkness behind the tree rose with a sound like tearing leather. The rich man's smirk faltered for the first time. "What in hell's name—" His words died as the creature stepped into the light. It stood on two legs, but no human ever stretched that tall, ever moved with that liquid wrongness. Its skin was the gray of long-buried bones, stretched too tight over a frame too large. Its fingers ended in hooked claws, and its face, God, its face, was a shifting nightmare of features that refused to stay still. One moment a man's pleading eyes, the next a wolf's snarling muzzle, then something else entirely. The alpha wolf whimpered, pressing its belly to the ground. Storm didn't back away. He stepped forward, head low, as if greeting an old enemy. The rich man recovered first. "Shoot it!" he screamed at his men. A gunshot rang out, then another. The creature's body jerked with each impact, black ichor oozing from wounds that sealed shut before their eyes. It tilted its head, the motion too quick, too bird-like, and spoke in a voice that came from everywhere at once. "You brought iron into my house." The words weren't English, weren't any language the women knew, yet they understood. "You brought death to my door." The rich man paled. "Kill it! Kill it now!" Chaos erupted. The cloaked men rushed forward, chains swinging. The silver wolves leaped to meet them. Storm reared, his hooves connecting with a guard's skull in a sickening crunch. The midwife grabbed the maid's arm, dragging her toward the glowing spring as the battle raged behind them. "The water," she gasped. "It healed the baby. Maybe it can—" Her words cut off as a chain whipped through the air, wrapping around her ankle. She fell hard, the twins tumbling from her arms. The maid screamed, diving for the babies, as a cloaked figure loomed over her, knife raised. Then, silence. The knife never fell. The figure stood frozen, trembling, as the creature's clawed hand closed around its hood. "You," it whispered, almost gently. The cloak fell away, revealing a face the midwife recognized. "Jasper," she breathed. The boy who'd vanished from the village 3 winters past, his mother wasting away with grief, but his eyes were empty now, his mouth slack. The creature stroked his cheek. "You were mine long before he put chains on you." Then it tore his throat out with its teeth. The rich man was backing toward the tunnel, his whip forgotten. The creature noticed. It smiled, showing too many teeth. "Running won't help. Your grandfather tried that." It pointed a claw at Storm. "He knows. Don't you, boy?" Storm snorted, pawing the ground. The maid, clutching the twins to her chest, suddenly understood. "Storm's not just a horse," she whispered. The midwife's eyes widened. "Then what?" A howl cut her off. Not wolf, not human. The cavern walls shook as the oak's roots ripped free of the stone, revealing a pit beneath them, a pit filled with bones wearing the same tattered cloaks as the rich man's guards. The creature spread its arms. "Welcome home." The pit of bones yawned beneath them like a grinning mouth, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and something far older, copper and burnt hair, the stench of old magic gone wrong. The creature stepped toward the rich man, its 2 long fingers flexing. "Your grandfather promised me 12 souls a year," it crooned, "but you got greedy. Thought you could cheat me." The rich man stumbled back, his boot heels scraping the edge of the pit. I never!" The creature laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Liar! You took 40 that first winter, left me hungry." Storm moved suddenly, positioning himself between the twins and the pit. His ears lay flat against his skull, his nostrils flaring. The maid noticed the way his legs trembled, not from fear, but something deeper. Recognition. The midwife saw it too. "He's been here before," she whispered. The maid's grip tightened on the babies. "Then why bring us here?" Before the midwife could answer, the creature's head snapped toward them. "Because," it said, as if hearing their whispers, "the horse knows the rules. A life for a life." It pointed at the twins. 2 fresh souls to replace the ones stolen. The rich man seized his chance. "Take them!" he shouted, wild-eyed. "They're nothing to me!" The creature's face twisted through a dozen horrors before settling on something almost human. "Oh, I'll take them," it murmured. "But you'll watch first." It lunged, not for the babies, but for the rich man. Its claws sank into his shoulders, lifting him kicking and screaming over the pit. "See what your family made," it hissed. Below, the bones began to rattle, rising like puppets on invisible strings. Skeletons clothed in rotting cloaks clambered up the walls, their empty eye sockets fixed on their master. Storm chose that moment to act. With a scream that shook dust from the cavern ceiling, he charged, not at the creature, but at the ancient oak. His body slammed into the trunk with a crack that echoed like thunder. The blue leaves rained down, their light flickering. The creature howled, dropping the rich man as it whirled toward Storm. "No!" The roots writhed, lashing out like whips. One wrapped around Storm's hind leg, yanking him off his feet. The maid didn't think. She shoved the twins into the midwife's arms and ran. Not away, but toward the spring. Scooping up a handful of glowing water, she hurled it at the creature. The droplets struck its back, sizzling like grease on a hot pan. The creature arched, its scream piercing the cavern. The skeletons froze. In that instant of stillness, the midwife saw the truth. The water wasn't healing. It was remembering. Each drop carried the weight of every soul the mine had stolen, and they were angry. The rich man crawled toward the tunnel, his fine clothes torn, his face a mask of terror. He didn't see the skeleton waiting for him until its bony fingers closed around his ankle. Storm struggled against the roots, his sides heaving. The maid reached him, tearing at the vines with her bare hands. They cut her palms, but she didn't stop. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why bring us here if it wanted the babies?" Storm's dark eye met hers, and for one impossible second, she heard words in her mind, clear as church bells, because some debts can't be paid with gold. Above them, the creature was changing. The blue light from the fallen leaves swirled around it, etching lines into its flesh, lines that looked suddenly terribly familiar. The midwife gasped. "Those are the same marks." The maid followed her gaze to Storm's flank, where old scars formed identical patterns. "Oh God," she breathed. "It's not a monster. It's—" The rich man's scream cut her off. The skeletons were dragging him into the pit. The skeletons dragged the rich man deeper into the pit, his screams growing muffled as the bones closed over him like a living grave. The creature convulsed as the blue light seared its flesh, the scars glowing white-hot as they rearranged themselves into something new, something almost human. The maid watched in horror as its elongated limbs shortened, its claws retracting into ragged fingernails, its shifting face settling into the worn features of an old woman with hollow cheeks and wild white hair. The tattered remains of a dress hung from her bony frame, the fabric stained with decades of dirt, and something darker. The midwife made the sign of the cross. "Marianne," she whispered. The name echoed through the cavern, making the silver wolves whimper. The woman, Marianne, turned her head sharply at the sound. Her eyes were still wrong, pupils swallowing the blue light whole. "You remember me?" she rasped, her voice now thin and cracked with age. "But you don't know. None of you ever knew." She lifted a trembling hand toward the oak tree, where Storm still struggled against the roots. "He was my son first." The words struck the maid like a physical blow. She looked at Storm, really looked, and saw what she'd missed before. The way he held his head, the stubborn set of his jaw. Not hoarse, never hoarse. The midwife staggered back. "The stories were true," she breathed. "The rich man's grandfather really did." "Trade?" Marianne interrupted with a broken laugh. "Number stole. My boy was the first. 12 years old, beautiful voice like morning birds. The old bastard heard him singing in the fields and wanted that voice for himself." She spat into the pit. "Took his body too when the magic went wrong." Storm finally wrenched free, his sides streaked with blood from the root's thorns. He limped toward Marianne, pressing his forehead to her chest like a child seeking comfort. She buried her fingers in his mane. No, the maid realized with dawning horror, his hair. "I tried to fix him," Marianne murmured, "made deals with older things. Dug too deep." She gestured to the cavern walls, where shadows now peeled away to reveal hundreds of faces pressed against the stone, some screaming, some sleeping, all trapped. "The mine eats what it's fed." A weak cry snapped their attention back to the twins. The weaker one had stopped breathing again, her tiny face turning blue. The maid clutched her tighter. "Please," she begged Marianne. "You were a mother once. Help them." Marianne's face twisted. "I can't." She pointed to the spring. "That's not water. It's the tears of everyone who died here. It remembers pain, not healing." Then her gaze fell on Storm, and something like hope flickered in those endless eyes. "But he can." Storm stepped forward, lowering his head over the baby. A single drop of blood fell from his wounds onto her lips. The effect was instant. The baby gasped, her eyes flying open. But they weren't human anymore. They shone with the same blue light as the oak leaves. Marianne let out a sob. "Oh, child, what have we done?" From the pit came a sound like 1,000 bones snapping at once. The rich man's hand clawed over the edge, his fingers blackened, his eyes vacant. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was smiling. The cavern trembled as the thing that had been the rich man hauled itself from the pit, its blackened fingers leaving smears of something thick and tar-like on the stone. Its smile stretched too wide, cracking the skin at the corners of its mouth, revealing teeth that were no longer human, sharpened points glistening with saliva. The maid stumbled back, clutching the transformed baby to her chest, her breath coming in, ragged gasps. The midwife grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Don't let it touch her," she hissed. The baby's blue-lit eyes blinked up at them, curiously calm, as if she didn't understand the horror unfolding around her. Marianne stepped between them and the advancing creature, her thin frame trembling, but her voice steady. "You don't want them," she said to the thing wearing the rich man's face. "They're not part of our deal." The creature tilted its head, the movement jerky like a puppet on strings. "Deal!" It echoed, its voice layered with something beneath, something that buzzed like flies against glass. "There is no deal anymore, only hunger." Its gaze locked onto the twins, and the hunger in that look made the maid's stomach turn. Storm reared up with a scream that shook dust from the cavern ceiling, his hooves slashing through the air. The creature barely flinched, swatting him aside like a bothersome insect. Storm crashed into the oak tree, the impact sending more of those glowing blue leaves showering down. Marianne cried out, rushing to his side, but the creature was already moving toward the twins, its fingers twitching with anticipation. Then a growl, low, rumbling, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. The silver wolves emerged from the shadows, their fur standing on end, teeth bared. The alpha lunged first, sinking its fangs into the creature's leg. Black ichor spurted, sizzling where it hit the ground. The creature howled, grabbing the wolf by the scruff and hurling it against the wall. The other wolves attacked in a frenzy, buying precious seconds. The midwife seized the maid's arm. "We have to go, now!" But the maid hesitated, her eyes darting to Storm and Marianne. "We can't leave them." The midwife's face was grim. "We have to save the babies." As if in response, the transformed twin in the maid's arms gurgled, her tiny fingers brushing the maid's cheek. And suddenly, the maid understood. The baby wasn't afraid. She was waiting. A sharp crack echoed through the cavern as one of the oak's massive roots tore free from the ground, lashing out like a whip. It struck the creature across the chest, sending it sprawling. Marianne stood with her hands raised, her lips moving in a silent chant. The roots responded, twisting and coiling around the creature, pinning it to the ground. Storm struggled to his feet, his sides heaving, his dark eyes fixed on the twins. The maid felt it then, a pull, a connection humming between Storm and the babies. The realization hit her like a lightning strike. "They're linked," she breathed. The midwife frowned. "What?" The maid turned to her, eyes wide. "The magic. It didn't just save them. It tied them together." Above them, the oak tree's branches shuddered, the blue light intensifying until it was nearly blinding. The roots tightened around the creature, but it was laughing now, a sound that made the wolves whimper and cover their ears. "You think this changes anything?" it spat. "The mine always gets what it's owed." Its gaze locked onto the maid, and its smile widened. "And now it has you." The ground beneath their feet gave way. The ground collapsed beneath them in a roar of crumbling stone and choking dust. The maid clutched the transformed twin to her chest as they plummeted into darkness, the midwife's scream echoing beside her. For one terrifying moment, there was nothing but the rush of air and the certainty of death. Then something massive and warm slammed into them, breaking their fall. Storm. His body took the impact, his legs buckling as they crashed onto a lower ledge deep in the mine's belly. The maid rolled off him, gasping, her arms still locked around the baby. The midwife landed hard nearby, the second twin cradled protectively against her. Around them, the walls pulsed with a sickly green phosphorescence, illuminating twisted tracks and rusted mining carts long abandoned. Above, the creature's laughter trickled down like poison. "Deeper you go," it crooned, its voice now coming from everywhere at once. "Closer to the heart." The words vibrated through the stone, making the old iron rails tremble. Storm staggered upright, his nostrils flaring at the stench rising from the tunnel ahead, rot and copper and something sweetly putrid. The maid followed his gaze and recoiled. The tunnel wasn't empty. Dozens of figures stood frozen in the shadows, their postures all wrong. Some crouched like animals, others hung limp from the ceiling by threads of glistening black sinew. None of them breathed. The midwife made a choked sound. "Are they—" "Don't look," the maid whispered, but it was too late. The nearest figure turned its head with a wet crack. Its eyes were gone, its mouth sewn shut with what looked like horsehair. Storm let out a warning snort, backing up until his body shielded the twins. The thing took a jerky step forward, then another, its movements puppet-like. A whimper escaped the maid's throat. "Marianne!" she screamed upward. "Help us!" Only silence answered. Then, from the darkness ahead, a new sound emerged. A rhythmic clink, 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 like chains dragging over stone. The frozen figures parted as something approached. A man. Or what had once been a man. His skin was the color of spoiled milk, stretched taut over protruding bones, and his arms ended not in hands, but in rusted mining picks fused to the flesh. His jaw unhinged like a snake's when he spoke. "Third shift's always the worst," he rasped, his voice whistling through broken teeth. He raised one pick hand toward the twins. "But management provides incentives." Storm lunged, teeth bared, but the pickman moved faster. His weapon flashed out, embedding in Storm's shoulder with a sickening crunch. Blood, too dark, too thick, spurted onto the tracks. The maid screamed as Storm collapsed, his legs thrashing. The pickman wrenched his weapon free and turned toward the twins. Time to clock in. That's when the transformed twin began to cry. Not a normal infant's wail. This sound was layered, echoing, as if 100 voices harmonized in that tiny throat. The green light intensified, throbbing in time with the cries. The frozen figures shuddered. Then, one by one, they reached up and began tearing the stitches from their mouths. The pickman hesitated. "That's new." From the tunnel depths came a sound like 1,000 sighs. The rails vibrated. A gust of wind, carrying the scent of turned earth and old blood, rushed past them. And something far below stirred. The maid finally understood. The mine wasn't just alive. It was waking up. The mine groaned like a living thing, as the infant's layered cries reverberated through the tunnels, shaking loose decades of dust and decay from the rotting support beams. The stitched mouth figures trembled violently as their sutures burst apart, one by one, blackened threads snapping like overstretched guitar strings. What emerged from their lips wasn't speech. It was a collective exhale of trapped anguish, a sound that made the maid's vision blur with sympathetic pain. The pickman staggered back, his milky skin glistening with sudden sweat. "No, no, no," he muttered, his rusted tools scraping against each other in panic. "Shift ain't over. Boss'll have our hides." Storm struggled to rise, his wounded shoulder leaking that unnatural dark blood onto the tracks where it sizzled like acid. Where each drop landed, the rust retreated, revealing shiny new metal beneath. The maid noticed with dawning awe. His blood wasn't just bleeding, it was healing. The transformed twin in her arms suddenly reached a tiny hand toward Storm, her glowing blue eyes fixed on his injury with eerie focus. The baby's fingers twitched, And for a heartbeat, the flow of blood reversed, crawling back into the wound as the flesh knit itself together. Storm shuddered, his entire body vibrating with some unseen energy. Above them, the ceiling trembled as Marianne's voice finally rang out, distorted by distance, but unmistakably furious. "You fools! You woke the first diggers!" Her warning came too late. The tunnel walls began to peel open like rotten fruit, revealing veins of pulsating ore that throbbed with the same rhythm as the twins' cries. From these fissures poured a flood of, not water, not dirt, but memories. The maid gasped as visions assaulted her. Men with pickaxes, singing as they descended, women carrying lunch pails, children playing near the shaft entrance. A happy mine, a loved mine, before the greed, before the first collapse, before the rich man's grandfather ordered the supports sabotaged to collect the insurance. The pickman was screaming now, clawing at his own face. "I remember! Oh God, I remember!" His wail was joined by dozens of others as the stitched-mouth workers fell to their knees, their bodies flickering between corporeal and spectral states. The midwife grabbed the maid's arm, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "The twins aren't just tied to Storm, they're tied to everything. They're waking up the mine's original soul." A new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, resonant thump from far below, like the heartbeat of some colossal beast. The tracks began to vibrate violently. Storm reared up, his eyes wild, and did something impossible. He spoke. Not in the maid's mind this time, but aloud, his voice rough with disuse, but undeniably human. "Run! Now!" The maid didn't question it. She sprinted down the nearest tunnel, the midwife at her heels, both clutching the twins as the mine convulsed around them. Behind them, the pickman's screams turned to laughter, high, hysterical, and horribly free. "Management's coming!" he howled. "And oh boys, is she pissed!" The last thing the maid saw before rounding the bend was the tunnel ceiling collapsing onto the spot where they'd stood. Not in a crash of rubble, but in a slow, deliberate swallow, as if the mine itself had taken a hungry breath. The tunnel twisted like a living creature around them, walls pulsing with that same eerie green light that now revealed disturbing details. Handprints burned into the stone, some small enough to be a child's, others elongated with too many fingers. The maid's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran. The transformed twin clutched tightly against her chest. The baby had stopped crying, but her eyes still glowed that unnatural blue, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move just beyond the edges of vision. Behind them, the mine continued its monstrous awakening, the distant thump, thump, thump growing louder, closer, more deliberate. The midwife stumbled, her foot catching on something soft and yielding. She looked down and recoiled. A miner's boot, still laced, the ankle bone protruding from its top like a macabre flower stem. The rest of him was embedded in the tunnel wall, his skeletal hand outstretched as if he'd tried to claw his way out moments before being fossilized. Storm pushed past them, his once dark coat now streaked with glowing veins of the same blue as the twins' eyes. Where his hooves struck the ground, the tracks shivered back to life, rust flaking away to reveal polished metal beneath. He turned his head, too far, too fluidly for a horse, and the maid saw his pupils had become vertical slits, like a cat's. "Not much time," he rasped, his voice layered with something deeper, older. "She's tasting the air." The midwife paled. "She?" A sound answered her, not from behind them, but ahead. A wet, slithering drag of something massive moving through adjacent tunnels, getting closer with each shuddering breath they took. The maid pressed back against the wall, the baby unusually still in her arms. Then, with a suddenness that made them all flinch, tiny fingers patted her cheek. The maid looked down. The twin was smiling, her glowing eyes fixed on something only she could see. "No," the maid whispered. No, no, no! The tunnel wall exploded inward. Wood splinters and rock shards rained down as something enormous forced its way through. Not the creature from above, not the pickmen, but something far worse. A mass of writhing, segmented flesh, the color of a week-old bruise. Its surface studded with what looked like half-digested mining helmets, their lamps still flickering weakly. At its front, where a head should have been, gaped a circular maw lined with rotating rows of human teeth, all sizes, all ages, some still bloody at the roots. It inhaled, drawing in their scent, and the helmets all turned in unison, their dim lights focusing on the twins. Storm reared, his body contorting unnaturally as his bones cracked and reshaped. "Take them!" he snarled. "No," commanded, his voice no longer his own. "Take them and run!" The maid didn't need telling twice. She grabbed the midwife's arm and bolted down the only remaining path, the thing's wet shrieks following. Behind them, Storm, or what was left of him, met the creature head-on, his form blurring at the edges as centuries of stolen magic finally tore free of its equine prison. The last thing the maid saw before rounding the corner was his body unfolding, revealing something winged and terrible and beautiful, before the tunnel collapsed behind them in a spray of bone and blue fire. The explosion of blue fire behind them sent the maid and midwife sprawling forward, the twins tumbling from their arms as the shockwave ripped through the tunnel. The air itself seemed to scream, a high, keening wail that wasn't sound so much as pain-given voice. The maid scrambled to her knees, her ears ringing, her vision swimming with after-images of that impossible winged thing Storm had become. The midwife was already crawling toward the twins, her hands shaking as she checked them for injuries. Miraculously, both babies were unharmed, though the transformed twins' eyes still burned with that eerie blue light, her tiny fingers clutching at the air as if trying to grasp the fading embers of magic. Then the screaming started, not from ahead, not from behind, from below. The ground beneath them shuddered violently, cracks spiderwebbing across the stone as something vast and ancient shifted in the depths. The maid grabbed the midwife's arm, her voice raw with terror. "We have to move, now!" But the midwife didn't respond. She was staring at the cracks, her face slack with horrified realization. The fissures weren't just spreading randomly. They were forming symbols, ancient, jagged things that made the eyes water to look at directly. The transformed twin reached toward them, her glow intensifying, and where her light touched the symbols, they began to bleed. Not blood, something thicker, darker, that smelled of turned earth and rotting promises. From the darkness ahead came a sound that froze them both, a wet, rhythmic clapping, like hands applauding in a pool of viscera. Then a voice, honey-smooth and utterly inhuman. "You've done so well." The tunnel walls peeled back like flower petals, revealing a chamber beyond. A cavern so vast, its ceiling was lost in shadow, its floor a mosaic of bones arranged in concentric circles. At its center stood a figure. Not the segmented horror from before. Not the creature wearing the rich man's skin. A woman, or something shaped like one. Her skin was the white of sun-bleached bone, her hair a living cascade of black roots that writhed against her shoulders. Her eyes were pure black, no whites, no pupils, just endless voids that drank in the light. She smiled, and her teeth were perfect pearls, until they weren't, elongating into needle points as she spoke. "Bring me the children." The maid stumbled back, clutching the transformed twin tighter. "No." The woman's smile widened. "Oh, sweet thing. You misunderstand." She raised a hand, and the bone mosaic at her feet rearranged itself, forming a perfect image of the twins. Not as they were now, but as they would be, young women, hands clasped, standing at the mouth of the mine as a line of shackled men filed past. The rich men, the pickmen, all the ones who'd ever fed the darkness here. They're not sacrifices, the woman crooned. They're the key. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed completely, sealing them in with her. The woman took a step forward, her bare feet making no sound against the bone mosaic. With each movement, the roots in her hair slithered like serpents, their tips brushing the ground and leaving behind thin trails of black liquid that hissed where it touched stone. The transformed twin in the maid's arms suddenly grew restless, her tiny body squirming as she reached toward the woman, with an urgency that bordered on desperation. The maid tightened her grip, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice echoing unnaturally in the cavern, as if the walls were absorbing the sound. The woman tilted her head, her void-like eyes studying the maid with something almost like pity. "You still don't understand," she murmured. "This was never your choice to make." She raised a hand, and the bone fragments at her feet moved, skittering across the ground like insects, before reforming into a new image. The village above, but not as it was now. A future vision, the streets empty, the houses crumbling, the river swollen and black. The only movement came from the mine's entrance, where two figures stood silhouetted against the setting sun. The twins, grown, waiting. The midwife made a choked sound. "You're showing us what happens if we don't leave them with you." The woman's smile returned, her needle teeth glinting. Clever thing. She gestured to the transformed twin, whose glow had begun to pulse in time, with the symbols still bleeding on the walls. She already knows. She remembers the before, the first diggers, the first sin. A shudder ran through the baby's body, and suddenly the maid saw men with pickaxes singing as they descended into the earth, not for gold, but for something older. A gift, they called it, a blessing. The woman, younger then, her hair just beginning to twist into roots, standing at the mine's mouth, handing out cups of dark liquid that made the miners' eyes shine with borrowed sight. They found what they sought, and they fed it. Not ore, not gems, themselves, willingly, until one refused, the rich man's ancestor, who saw profit where others saw sacrament, who sabotaged the supports, who locked the woman below, who made the first deal with the thing that should never have been woken. The vision shattered as the twin let out a wail, her glow flaring so brightly it seared shadows into the maid's vision. When she blinked the spots away, the woman was closer, much closer, her bone-white fingers outstretched. "Give her to me," she whispered, "before he comes back." The ground trembled, not from below this time, from above. Something was digging, something that remembered the taste of rebellion. The ceiling of the cavern cracked open with a sound like splintering bone, raining dirt and rock down upon them. The maid shielded the twins as a monstrous shadow descended. Not the segmented horror from before, not the winged thing Storm had become, but something far older. Its body was a shifting mass of darkness, studded with the screaming faces of every soul the mine had ever claimed. At its core pulsed a single, glowing red eye, the same eye that had watched from the deepest pit when the rich man's ancestor first struck his deal. The woman hissed, her roots lashing like whips. "You were never supposed to wake," she snarled. The thing laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. "You were never supposed to interfere." Its gaze locked onto the twins, and the transformed baby's glow flickered in response, not in fear, but recognition. The maid finally understood. The twins weren't just the key to continuing the cycle, they were the key to breaking it. Without thinking, she thrust the transformed twin toward the woman. "Take her!" Then she turned to the midwife. "Run with the other one, as far as you can." The woman caught the glowing baby, her void eyes widening as the child's light seeped into her roots. turning them from black to vibrant green. The thing roared, surging forward, but it was too late. The twin in the woman's arms changed, her tiny body dissolving into pure light that shot through the cavern like lightning. Where it struck, the screaming faces in the thing's body stilled, their expressions softening into peace before vanishing entirely. The thing howled as its form began to unravel. "This isn't over." The woman smiled grimly, her own body beginning to fade. "Oh, but it is." She looked at the maid one last time. The first sacrifice was willing. The last one must be too. Then she was gone, and the cavern collapsed around them. The maid ran, the midwife ahead of her with the second twin, as the mine self-destructed behind them. They burst onto the surface just as dawn broke, the village stirring in confusion at the quaking earth. Behind them, the mine entrance sealed itself with a final, thunderous crash, leaving only a smooth hillside where it had once been. And in the midwife's arms, the second twin began to cry, with perfectly normal human sobs. The transformed twin was the sacrifice, but not to the mine. To end it. Her light wasn't just magic. It was the collective forgiveness of all the lost souls, finally breaking the curse. The woman wasn't the villain. She was the last priestess, trying to contain what the first rich man unleashed. The remaining twin is now free of the curse, but the memory of what happened lingers in the village's soil. Moral lesson. Greed breeds monsters, but love, even the love of a stranger, can unbind the darkest chains. Some debts aren't paid in gold or blood, but in the courage to let go.